Hello my loves, continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story: The Courage to Speak. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a close-knit family often gathered for Sunday dinners. Among the regular attendees was a young boy named Alex, who always seemed a bit withdrawn. Alex was 12 years old, and his cousins, Mike and Lily, often wondered why he rarely smiled and why his eyes held a sadness that no child should bear. One evening, during one of these family gatherings, Mike noticed a bruise on Alex's arm. When he asked about it, Alex shrugged it off, saying he had fallen off his bike. But Mike wasn't convinced. He had seen similar bruises on Alex before, each time with a different explanation. Mike decided to keep a closer eye on Alex. Over the next few weeks, he noticed more bruises and a growing fear in Alex's eyes whenever his father, Uncle Tom, was around. Tom was known to have a short temper, but the extent of his cruelty was something the family hadn't fully realized. One day, after school, Mike found Alex sitting alone in the backyard, staring blankly at the ground. Mike sat down next to him and gently asked, "Alex, what's really going on? You can trust me." Alex hesitated, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's my dad," he finally whispered. "He's always angry. He hits me for everything. I can't do anything right." Mike felt a surge of anger and sadness. He hugged Alex tightly. "You don't deserve this, Alex. We have to tell someone. This can't keep happening." Alex shook his head vigorously. "No, Mike. He'll hurt me even more if he finds out I told anyone. And he'll hurt Mom too." Mike felt a knot in his stomach. He knew he had to do something, but he also understood Alex's fear. He decided to talk to his own parents first, hoping they would know how to handle the situation. That evening, Mike approached his parents, John and Mary, and told them everything Alex had shared. They listened intently, their faces growing more concerned with each passing moment. "We need to help him," Mike insisted. "We can't just ignore this." John nodded. "You're right, Mike. We can't let this go on. We'll talk to Alex's mom, and if necessary, we'll involve the authorities. But we have to be careful." The next day, John and Mary invited Alex's mother, Aunt Lisa, over for coffee. As they talked, they gently broached the subject of Tom's temper and the possibility of abuse. Lisa initially denied it, but as tears filled her eyes, she finally admitted the truth. "He's been like this for years," Lisa confessed. "I thought I could manage it, that it would get better. But it's only gotten worse. I'm terrified for Alex, but I don't know how to leave. I don't know where to go." Mary took Lisa's hand. "You don't have to do this alone. There are shelters and organizations that can help. We will support you every step of the way." With John and Mary's help, Lisa contacted a local domestic violence shelter. They provided her with resources and a plan to leave safely. Lisa gathered the courage to take action, knowing she had the support of her extended family. One evening, while Tom was out, Lisa packed their essentials and left with Alex to the shelter. It was a difficult and emotional step, but she knew it was the right one. The shelter provided them with a safe place to stay, counseling, and legal assistance. Tom was furious when he found out, but the restraining order kept him at bay. Lisa filed for divorce and sought custody of Alex. The process was long and challenging, but with the support of her family and the shelter, she remained steadfast. Alex struggled with the trauma of his father's abuse, but with therapy and the loving support of his mother and cousins, he began to heal. He found solace in activities he enjoyed, like drawing and playing soccer. Slowly, his laughter returned, and the fear in his eyes faded. Years later, Alex stood before a group of children and parents at a community center, sharing his story. I was afraid to speak up, but my cousin Mike helped me find the courage. No one deserves to live in fear. If you're being hurt, tell someone you trust. There is help, and there is hope. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were facing similar struggles. Alex's journey from a life of fear to one of empowerment inspired others to seek help and break free from the chains of abuse. Alex and his family had come a long way, and their story was a powerful reminder of the importance of speaking out and supporting one another. In the end, the courage to speak had not only saved Alex but had also given him a platform to help others find their own voice. Story: I don't know what to do anymore. As the title says, I'm fine with my mom cheating on my dad. I apologize in advance for bad English and for not adding paragraphs the first time. I never support cheating, but in this case it's different. A few people know about this, and I need to talk with someone so badly about this situation. I've tried Discord and other social medias, but I never had the courage to talk about my family issues. My family is from South Italy and my mom and dad married in 2006. My mom says that ever since he got a job he's been acting differently. He's been really violent, aggressive, and anxious with excessive haste in doing things. She never felt calm being around him, she says. My mom during fights always tells him he's bipolar because one moment he's chill and one moment he would start flipping off over the stupidest things. When I was a kid he always used to kick, punch and break my toys when he was angry. He broke an expensive dollhouse I had that costed him a lot of work. Destroying random things he sees in front of him when he's mad is a bad habit he has. He doesn't physically harm me anymore, but when me and my sister were younger he always used to hit us and throw things at us when he was mad, leaving a lot of bruises. One day he beat my sister so bad she started vomiting all over the floor. He doesn't beat me anymore because I learned to not start fights with him. The only one he still physically harms is my mother. They fight almost every day. One of the main reason is money. We have huge economic problems. One day he almost broke her neck, and I remember seeing her on the bed unable to move for several days. My mom after many years decided that she was tired of her life and met another man that lived in Milan, North Italy, and now we're planning to go live near Milan after I finish high school here in South Italy. I hate cheating, but my mom always told my dad that she wanted to divorce him and that she wanted to get loved by another man, but my dad always got aggressive and violent over that topic. She's scared that if she finds out about her secret relationship he will do things that I can't imagine happening. I know cheating is bad, but my mom deserves to be happy too, and a man that treats her right. My mom is a kind person, and doesn't have the courage to report my dad to the police cause she claims that it would ruin his life. The thing is, even if my dad isn't the most peaceful person, his anger issues isn't the only thing about him. I know he loves me and my sister, he always roots for us, he's the one that introduced me to the world of cinema, which is now my favorite passion. We listen to music together and go to concerts together. The last concert we attended was the Eek a Mouse one. I know he's not really a bad person, he just has some issues he didn't treat when he was younger. I know that with the right treatment he can be the dad I always saw in him. He makes sure to never miss my sister's volleyball matches, and always gives her prizes after. He takes us to wonderful places, especially in summer. Most of the times he's here we laugh together, talk together, watch videos together. Sometimes he apologizes to my mom after fighting, and one time he brought her a big bouquet of flowers. As I said, I know that deep down he is a good person. But at the same time, I can't forgive him for what he did to me, my sister and especially my mom. Avatar 3 will be released in December of next year, and it will be the first Avatar movie I will most likely see without my father. I cry every time I imagine him coming back from work and eating alone, without us. I love my father, but I can't forgive him. What do I do? Please help me if you read this. Story about how I lived with a toxic family, I guess. Here's a story about my toxic foster parents and my narcissistic foster sister. Back when I was only 10 years old, my mother was struggling with life, so me and my 4 other siblings were put into foster care since my mother wasn't a good parent to take care of us. Each of us were placed in different homes. 2 of my sisters lived in one home together, the other 2 are split apart, and there is me, who lived alone with no siblings at all. Anyways, as I was saying, I was placed in a Christian home where I lived with a pastor and the first lady and a girl named Destiny. Ever since I met them I thought I would be treated well, but that's where I was wrong. You see, my foster parents were strict, and when I mean strict I mean it. They didn't like that fact that I was drawing demonic stuff when I was only drawing silly harmless cartoons. Back when I was 10, I was the type of kid who was obsessed with horror, video games, and of course drawing, but none of those stuff were welcomed in that house I was placed in. Sometimes I was called the devil for the art I drew, and it was at the point where they even threw away my childhood toys I had as a baby that I had brought to that house as a comfort to remember my family and mother. I was only 10. They ripped every picture I drew that were demonic. They even treated me like an outcast and treated Destiny like she was the best foster daughter in the world. Destiny had the same interest as I did, but she was never punished because she was God's child. Destiny had got many privileges than I did. She would set me up for stuff, manipulate me, sexually touched me, etc. She always wanted attention when really I was the one who needed love and support. To tell the truth, I was jealous of her. She always got what she wanted. She even destroyed my stuff and got away with it, and the best part is she's the reason why my art, my childhood toys were taken away from me. Home wasn't the only place she treated me like shit. At school she would spread lies about me where at the point I wanted to commit suicide. She even hurt herself just so she could get me into serious trouble, and when I did she would laugh and giggle to her friends about it the next day. She would tell the school I was a Satanist. Reminder, I'm not 10 at this time where she starts doing her bullshit. I'm 12 at that time. She also fought me countless times over stupid stuff, and when I would fight back she would bring my foster mother in. Me, a 12-year-old girl, thinking that my foster mom is gonna have my back and help me and defend me from Destiny. No, none of that even happened. I was pinned to the floor by my foster mother while Destiny beat on me. When she got finished, I would be locked in my room alone to cry in. I reported this to my social worker, but nothing was done about it. Now let's talk about my foster mother and father since I got the Destiny stuff out of the way. My foster mother was the type of mother where she would dress you up into pink clothes, bows, and jewelry just for church, just to make you seem like the cutest thing in the world. But my foster father was just a mean man who yelled at me and called me terrible stuff just 'cause I was demonic. But anyways, my foster mother would embarrass me in the church and tell everybody that there's a demon in the church and then points at me. Everyone would look at me with sadness or a shocked face. She would tell them that I would worship the devil in my art I drew. I still remember that day where she called me to the stage and yelled at me for the demon to come out. I would cry for them to stop, but nothing worked. Now you may think this is fake, but this is real. Real stuff that happened to me. But yeah, anyways, they would yell at me for like 2 minutes, and when they were done they would say, "The demon is gone, child." I would just stand there in fear while I cried because I didn't know what was going on. And then the next day at home I was claimed to have another demon in me. Thank God I'm out of that house now. I'm scared to go in churches now because of them. Story: I'm fine with my mom cheating on my dad, and even encouraged her to live with his new man. It's been 5 months since I set my foot on the US, and every day is a living hell to me. I have never really wanted to settle and study here, but now it is like I was forced to live like this for possibly years before becoming on my own. It's not America per se that is the problem, but the circumstance under which I got here. TLDR at the end of this TED Talk. To start with, my family really wanted us to study abroad and hopefully move to the US as I grow up, considering my other relatives already living there. TBH, I had no interest in going to the US to seek opportunity, and I surmised life would be depressing to me, at least. So I continued minding my own business in high school, making friends, getting grades, dating. In 10th grade, the concern of studying abroad rose to me, but I was too skeptical to think about it. I even thought my family intended to have me complete high school before moving, so I shook it off. Then in 11th grade, my parents paid for me to study SAT. Now I knew the matter was drawing closer to me day by day, so I started researching my own future plan before my parents take over. Little did I know, my parents sealed a deal with the language center to assist me with studying abroad. I tried to convince the center otherwise, but they already settled with my parents that the path to studying in the US was inevitable. I then tried to persuade my parents, but they ignored my request and they blamed on me for depending on others on your future career. I was speechless because my plan was screwed and I had to come to terms with the so-called American dream. At least they would give me a chance to graduate high school in Vietnam, right? Spoiler alert, well shit. So flash forward to summer 2023, as I finished 11th grade. I learned of a month-long vacation to the US. My parents told the purpose of the trip was to visit universities I and my sis will study in the future. Once again, I hoped this was just another post-COVID vacation and I could return home to continue 12th grade. Before leaving Vienna, I saw my GF for the last time and headed off. And here we are, the United States. We met the long-time no-see relative families and finally got into an empty flat. Why couldn't we stay in a hotel or something, but this very deserted flat in a strangely odd community? Yeah, it was at this moment that I knew my parents deceived me. I would be staying here for a while, studying right in the US, and having a new life. All my hope was gone. My heart shattered, but nobody seemed to bat an eye. My final high school year in Vietnam was gone, my loved ones were far away, and I couldn't even have a way back. I mean, my family had a well-planned trip around the US and go home, but it was just an excuse to go past immigration. When I confronted them, my parents said they needed to have a more relaxing life in the US, my sis was about to enter college soon, and I was forced to accept that life was better here. I hid my cries and felt blank, and next I had to confront my GF. People usually chastised early love, but I ignored what they said and let us glide over distance love. The following days, we went to the newcomer center, and boom, I was now a student of a local high school. All my effort in Vietnam turned to waste, and what worse, I was sorted to junior class aka 11th grade here. In other words, the road to independence was extended by a year unless I was an exorbitant child prodigy, but I was not. 5 months had passed, and I didn't make much true friends here. My contact in Vietnam was now only my GF, and we had frequent arguments, but in the end we deeply missed each other. I suffered from day-to-day depression, because I felt lonely. The other people in my family kept praising the US, but I felt sick of it because of absurd culture shock and I couldn't forgive them for deceiving me. Now my future plan was vague, and I had constant suicidal thought, but the worst part was I couldn't tell my parents how I felt. They just kept bringing up valid arguments to shut me up. I hated being forced to love American life. I know there are difficulties and setbacks in Vietnam, but I don't have the choice to choose my path. Money does not give happiness, and I'm afraid nobody's on my side. Anyways, what I want to do now is to just proceed on living like this for a while, then I could devise another plan and execute it right away. I want to escape the dependency on my family and live on my own by being the best I could be, whatever the career I choose. I would take my naivety as a lesson to be able to decide things on my own, but everything seems to be unstable for me right now. In the end, I miss my home country, my loved one, and I want to leave the US immediately. There's nothing in the US that would keep me back, even money. That's the story I want to tell today. Thanks for reading. Story: The Secrets of Royal Children's Haven. Hi everybody, I'm 30 years old now. My income is about 3x/month. Currently, I am increasingly stuck in my relationship with my biological mother. Is there anyone here in the same situation who can share? Ever since I graduated from school and started working, my mother always compared me with children A, B, C, X, Y, Z. One day I asked him why he didn't work in construction, one day he did IT, another day he did architecture, one day his brother and sister worked in MMO and just bought a house. The salary was very high, one day his friend who worked at VCB got money from the copper sewing fund. Serve up to 5 million, why don't you work in a bank? Every time I hear where A, B, C earns 15 to 20 million, they come back and show off. I'm bored, so I never share about my work and salary. The conversation between mother and daughter is always only a few sentences, and always revolves around salary and income. I have never seen her ask how the job was, if she liked the job, if there were any difficulties, or any words of support. In 2018, my best friend came to wish me a happy new year, and she also asked her friend to advise me on changing careers. After a while, I went to Hanoi to work. During pandemic 2020, the company allowed WFH for about 2 weeks. I went home for a while. During these 2 weeks everything was okay. On the last day I planned to withdraw money and give it to her as food and living expenses for those 2 weeks before going to Hanoi. But things didn't go as planned. As soon as I finished lunch and went up to the room to rest, my grandmother rushed into the room and scolded me, saying that I was too old to think. How many days had I lived without being able to give any money, and that I had no responsibility towards the family? He even pulled out a notebook and said he had recorded all the money I had given her so far, then threw it in my face and told me to look at it. I'm bored and don't want to say anything again. Wait until you're done talking, withdraw money, give it, then book a car to go to Hanoi. 2. I've only been married for 2 years. Recently, I had a small child for a few months, so I couldn't go back to my paternal hometown, district in Bac Giang, to visit my uncle and aunt before Tet. After Tet, I came home to play until the 4th, then booked a car to go to my wife's hometown, also Bac Giang, but it's a city, not convenient to go through the countryside, before going to Hanoi. During Tet, cars are expensive and there are a lot of trips, so the couple booked a shared car. As soon as I got in the car and was about to leave, my grandmother knocked on the door and told me to go to my grandfather's hometown to celebrate the new year. At that time, I didn't have time to do anything else, and the road was inconvenient, so I told her to go to this car to drop off a fixed passenger. She couldn't go like that. Thinking everything was over, the other day she went to Hanoi to visit. After talking for a while, she told her family that they don't have money to go anywhere. I was so upset that after talking for a while, she said that even when I go back to my hometown, I don't have money to book a car. If I have money, I'll book the whole car and go wherever I want, and I'll turn wherever I turn. Everyone knows that the bus only runs on fixed routes. Even if you book the bus, it won't wait for you because in that time it can run 1 to 2 more trips. Not to mention the price on Tet holidays will be 1.5 equals x.2 on weekdays. I was so shocked that I couldn't stand it, so when I argued, I brought up the story that A, B, and C had just been working for a few years and bought a house. It's so boring that I don't even bother to say it again. Houses in Hanoi are about 3 million VND/unit. If you work for 5 years and are able to buy a house on your own, that's also an excellent form of society. I know that you'll go somewhere else and then come back and say it again, but it's okay. I'm bored and don't want to argue anymore because it won't get me anywhere. Before getting married, my wife worked very hard. Due to the nature of her job, she worked 6 days a week, working from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. continuously for 3 years, so before getting married, she quit her job to refresh for a few months. Then when I went back to work, I was still pregnant, so work was not the same as before. This is almost the end of 6 months of maternity leave, but because the baby was born prematurely, the two planned to let their wives take more time off and find a temporary job to work at home to take care of the baby, partly because they don't want her to come down and take care of them. It's less work, but it's extremely difficult. Headache. She knew that, so she constantly pressured her to go work for the company. In her eyes, her wife stayed home all day off and was a freeloader, refusing to go to work. To explain, the reason was that in the neighborhood, yes, in the neighborhood, there was a child A who had been on maternity leave for 2 months and left her child at home with her grandparents to look after her so she could go to work. I'm sure this case is only a minority, and for many reasons, not many mothers would feel secure in doing so. She also gave herself the example that in the past, she gave away her baby at 3 months, but today, there are no kindergartens that accept 3-month-old babies. She also talked to her wife in private many times, at the peak of which she told her that if she didn't go to work, you'd starve to death, while our family was fully able to pay for living expenses. Buying a house is determined by circumstances and will take a long time, but as long as you can't buy a house, it will probably be talked about for a long time. In fact, this National Assembly relationship is becoming more and more deadlocked day by day. I know that for many reasons, partly because of the characteristics of her previous job, partly because of her high expectations for her children, she is like that. But her constant comparison and blind pressure without a specific solution makes me more and more stressed and tired. Many times I want to give up, just stay in Hanoi and then go back to my hometown to play for Tet. But thinking back, I was the only child and my father passed away early, so I couldn't do that. Story: the terrible, horrible, awful chat I had with my GF's parents where I couldn't keep my mouth shut. My husband and I have a long-term family friend, John, who is basically the mayor everywhere we go. My children call him Uncle, and we've been this guy's ride-or-die bestie through his first wife, 3 girlfriends, 1 serious relationship, and his new wife. All that to say, given the length of our friendship, we know his family and his other friends. About 10 years ago, John's friend Dave and his wife, Emily, happened to be in the area with their kids and wanted to come hang out with us and several other couples during a beach vacation we were all on together, where several people/couples/families chipped in for rooms of a large beach house. Dave and Emily weren't invited, but just because no one knew them, but we invited John's friends to come hang out all day. Emily ends up talking with me quite a bit. My husband is not in town yet and joining our family the next day, and largely it was nice to have company. We talk almost all afternoon. She's acting as though we are long-lost sisters. Most of the conversation I enjoyed, but it became clear pretty quickly that she didn't really know who she was, what she was doing, and she tried to give me her version of social media therapy on the beach, and after the second beer it was full-on Dr. Phil and difficult to steer the conversation. I was annoyed, but okay. I had an older kid there, so other priorities. It was clear she was very not entirely sober. I choose to not think anything of the conversation missteps. After a fun day of beach drinking and kids playing, it was decided that Dave and Emily couldn't drive and it would just be easier to squeeze them into our beach house for a night. Dave decides to go put his kids to bed in one of the children's bedrooms. He must have passed out because he never returned. This left his wife Emily upstairs hanging out. After an hour more of all the kids in bed and adults upstairs playing cards, Emily decided to show everyone her yoga skills and gets quickly overtly sexual with the men in the room. She starts doing handstand splits on the top of the couch. She's asking some of the guys in the room to help her do couple moves where it takes 2 to get her into the right position. This went on for at least a half hour. At one point, she sits on the shoulders of the younger solo guy on the couch, Sean, and he stood up trying to get her to stop. She ends up spun around his head with her crotch in his face for a split second, and she made some comment about whether he could smell her poocha. Story: why are adults unkind to children that come from disadvantaged families? I grew up in a dysfunctional family, to say the least. Family violence, perpetrated by both my parents to each other and towards the children, and my oldest brother was very violent with the other siblings too. The abuse was mostly physical, verbal/psychological, but also some of my siblings were sexually molested by a friend of the family. There was also a vast amount of neglect. I broke my arm and my parents didn't take me to the hospital for weeks, never went to the dentist, didn't even go to school from grade 2 onwards. Often there were times where there wasn't enough food to eat, and because we had to rely on tank water, there were periods of time where we wouldn't have money to get water carted in, so there wouldn't be any water to shower or flush the toilet with. My mom was a victim of abuse from my father on more occasions than I can actually remember, including an attempt of strangulation to the point of unconsciousness that I witnessed. He told me that was in your honor after my mom had accused him of sexually molesting me. He also attacked her so severely on one occasion while pregnant that it resulted in a stillbirth. My dad is a piece of shit. From what I understand, he grew up in a daily unstable environment, but as an adult I cannot accept that he didn't have the capacity to change and that it was solely generational trauma he was passing down. He chose to be the way he was and took no steps to attempt to change. My mom, without a shadow of a doubt, has an undiagnosed mental illness. She is a compulsive liar. She'd make up anything that would get people to give her things/sympathy. She was a drug addict, addicted to any legal opioid she could get her hands on. This was mostly medication such as paracetamol, codeine, or just straight-up codeine when it was available to purchase OTC. She'd pharmacy hop daily, and there were a few pharmacists that she knew so well she'd send different siblings in with notes to purchase medication for her. She treated most of her kids, some she treated better, worse than I'd treat my enemy. She called me little bitch from the age of 3, possibly younger, but obviously I can't remember. She would let me know I was far less attractive than my other sisters, and also would make comments about my legs and how fat they were despite never actually being overweight. Anyway, I could go on, but you get the idea. I don't know why, but recently I've been having a lot of random memories from my childhood pop up. Not just of awful things my parents did to us, but of those people outside the family would treat us. I remember when the two main pharmacies cottoned on to the fact my mom was buying codeine in large quantities from both the pharmacist screamed at me, a little 12 years old, walking in with a note written by my mother who I was terrified of, about how he knew that mom was pharmacy hopping and that he wouldn't serve us again. He did this in front of other customers, small town, so people that I'd encountered before, and made me feel so disgusted and ashamed of myself. Another time was when I was part of a club and supplies started going missing, toilet paper, milk, Milo, and was completely ostracized, accused and excluded by the entire team of adults running the club. Even when the real thief had been uncovered, no apology or acknowledgement of mistake was ever offered. There was another time that my father had punched me in the mouth so bad that the inside of my lip was cut and spurting blood, which resulted in the exterior being bruised and swollen for a long while. Shop attendants in the town were very rude to me during the time while my lip was stuffed up. These are just a few examples of many. I would like to add that I don't believe I was an awful child. I never swore and, in my opinion, wasn't rude, always used manners, and was so painful shy to the point of finding it difficult to look people in the eyes because I truly believed I was scum. What I would like to know is why adults outside the family were also rude/unkind to me as a child. It's just now as an adult I've realized how fucked it is that random adults would treat a child that was obviously having an absolute horrendous time at home so badly. Story: the best days of my life. A little backstory. When I was 10, my parents divorced. My mom had drug problems by then, and my dad cheated on her. I don't know which caused which. I don't know if the family court was so exceedingly against men that they rather gave me to my drug addict mom than let my father take me, or if she managed to hide it. But there we were. A single mom raising a boy. Meanwhile, my brother was taken by my dad at my mother's request. The next 4 years was the worst years of my entire life. My therapist said, bury it in the past and pile good memories on them so they may never be seen. So I am not going into any details about it. Instead, I will write based on the title. The best 2 days of my life. The day that she died, and the day of her funeral. I had a nice long sleep, which was already odd. Usually she woke me up early, but not this time. I don't know why, but I felt somehow better than usual. For many hours I was just having fun in the house. Then I heard her telephone ring, and I was exceedingly scared. But the phone just rang and rang. I carefully opened her door and saw her lying on the bed, surrounded with some empty syringes, and not moving. As I looked at her for a while, I noticed that she is not breathing. It took a while to click in, but then I was just joyfully jumped. This was a dream come true. I went to her phone, searched for my dad's number, and for the first time since our separation called him. I remember yelling in joy that she died. She finally died. My mother is no more. He was shocked in the phone, calling a bad joke, but then I said it's not joke. It's finally over. Then I asked to help me burn the corpse, because it's heavy, and I don't want to burn inside the house. He called the cops and came to the house himself as well. I remember the cops being very distressed the way I acted. A single mom died, and the child is smiling and celebrating. It was clear on their face that they are very uncomfortable with the situation, but I just couldn't stop smiling. I overheard them speaking that I am a future serial killer. Hours later, my father arrived. He was very shocked that the police was still there gathering evidence. He lived far away. By then I told the cops everything I knew. He was shocked when the police told that they found a lot of drugs and he can't go in because the case is under investigation. Then he looked at me as I was still smiling. The only way I could describe his face was terror. I don't know what he was thinking about the situation, but he just took me to my new home. He tried to ask me while I was smiling, but I never answered. I just couldn't. He knew something was wrong, but not pried into it. Sometimes later came the funeral. It didn't end in an exactly happy way, but it was still a great day to me. A final goodbye to the most evil and vile person I ever knew. I had the same crazy smile I had on the day she died. Many people commented on it. My uncle said that I look like a serial killer. My aunt said that it must be the way I cope. My cousin said that I look like the Joker. It must have been very odd to everyone. People being sad, and some women crying, and the child of this person smiling the whole time. Later I was asked to say something in front of the crowd. My head was full of thoughts, but in the end all I was said. Good riddance. And then I started laughing like never before, or since. The purest joy a person can have. My dad quickly took me away, and he was angry. He asked, "What's wrong with you? Why did you say something like this?" Then I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time since the funeral started I had a serious face. I said, "After everything she done to me, I wish I killed her myself." Then he had the same face when he looked at me the first time, celebrating back on that day. That same terror. As if it were written on his face. What this kid has become. Then all he asked is to be silent from now on, and let the others mourn. He knew at that point that something went horribly wrong during my time with her. I put my smile back and obliged. For now. Later on, after her coffin was put into the ground, everyone, including me, was given a flower. I saw the people throwing it into the hole as a final goodbye, but I didn't go. When only I was there with the flower, my dad asked me to give my goodbye. I walked up to the grave and looked down. Then I turned around to the crowd and yelled, "She does not deserve this. She does not deserve any of this." Everyone was shocked. There was some yelling. Then my dad came to me, and everyone fell silent. He asked, "How can I say this? What she has done to me?" It was the first time anyone ever asked. For the whole time everyone was thinking that something is wrong with me, but nobody bothered to ask. Why? Why I behave like this? Why I hate her so much? And then I told everything as loud as I could speak. The beatings, the ****UAL abuses, the drugs, and my attempted suicide. Everything. By the end of it, I fell on my knees crying. I don't remember the faces. I couldn't see through the tears. My dad hugged me and told, "Let's just go home." But I couldn't. I was just kneeling there paralyzed. Then someone else picked me up. I believe it was my uncle. He took me into my dad's car and we went home. There was no more speaking that day. By the time we arrived, I pulled myself together enough to walk into my bed and cried myself into sleep. Story: I'm an American Muslim convert who was arrested, tortured and deported as a suspected insurgent from Egypt in 2005. So, I was raised a Christian. My mother was a very religious person. She wasn't practicing at all, but she loved her religion and she loved God. So, I think I have always been spiritual deep down. As a young and dumb youth, I dabbled in the occult and Satanism, but eventually grew out of that and was just a hardened atheist. Back in 2002, I ended up going to jail for a crime I didn't commit. I went to a warehouse with a couple friends whose father worked there and they were grabbing a bunch of stuff they said was his. 3 months later, I get a visit from the police asking about a robbery at this same warehouse. Apparently, the kid's father had been fired and everything that was taken was considered theft, and that's how that all happened. I was arrested and spent 4 months in jail before the judge threw my case out of court and let me out. Being an innocent man in jail, I had a lot of time to think about life, about my life, about justice, and how our system of justice is anything but just. I started thinking, if I could take my case even to the highest court, I would still be subject to the whims of a human judge. Maybe he had a bad day? Maybe his wife upset him or his kids. Maybe I look like someone he hated? I realized then that only God the Almighty could provide perfect justice. When I got out of jail, I was so happy to be free. My entire view on life had changed and I was no longer an atheist. I became firmly Christian and started going to church every Wednesday and Sunday. I was quickly discontented with the Christian church. So many things didn't make sense to me. I would ask questions like, Jesus was God on earth, yet in all his time on this earth, he did nothing at all worth mentioning before he started his ministry. What did he do while he was growing up? This is supposedly the Almighty God incarnate on earth, and he did nothing at all worth mentioning between the ages of 10 and 33? Stuff like that. This was around 2002-3-ish, the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and fresh off 9/11, and Islamophobia was at its height, and shamefully, I bought into it. After September 11th, I was the nastiest, most disgusting 24-year-old on the internet when it came to Islam. I bashed people and said and did horrible things to Muslims online. But after my time in jail, I came out with a new attitude. I realized that I knew nothing about anything and I was a liar. A liar to myself. I was speaking with a friend and we were talking about religion, and somehow Islam and Muslims came up. And I said to him, "You know, I have spent the last few years hating these people and I honestly know absolutely nothing about them. I'm ashamed of myself, so I took it upon myself to learn about these people I hated. I would learn their religion and guide them to the true religion of Christianity." I spent the next few months obsessed with learning about Islam and Muslims, and I started to feel jealous of their faith, and their conviction and steadfastness. I was jealous of the Prophet Muhammad SAW. More than anything, I was jealous of his story and how every single detail of his life was so perfectly recorded. From how he was with his wives to how he used the bathroom and groomed himself. I felt connected to him, SAW. As I said previously, I had an issue with how we knew nearly nothing of the life of Jesus, before he started his ministry, so this level of narration and extreme attention to detailing the life of the Prophet, SAW, was very appealing to me. I studied more and realized that there was very little significant difference between Islam and Christianity, and after a whole lot of self-reflection, I made the most difficult decision in my life and converted and became a Muslim. Within 3 months I was on an airplane on my way to Egypt to study Arabic and Islam. I spent 2 years in Egypt, then made my way to the Sultanate of Oman for work in hopes of getting married and starting a family. I spent another 2 years in Oman working and traveling back and forth to Egypt to spend time with the friends I had made there. My story about my time in Egypt leading up to this incident is equally as crazy and long as I won't go into everything here for the sake of time, but maybe I will go into how I met the people I will be speaking about here in a minute in another post if anyone cares to hear it. On one of my trips back to Egypt, I was introduced to my now wife. We hit it off and were married. I returned to Oman to work for a while to make some money and bring her with me. I spent 15 months working double shifts and finally, it was time to go bring my wife home. I arrived in Egypt and everything was amazing. We had a great party and I spent that first night with my new wife. That night we were asleep, it was like 3 to 4 a.m. and someone was banging on the door. We woke up and went outside and there were like 20 men in full riot gear and AK-47s. They grabbed me and threw me in the back of a truck. For the second time in 3 years, I found myself being dragged away and thrown into jail unjustly. In the truck was my best friend, a local doctor who I will call Doc, and about 50 other people. I was afraid, but I wasn't terrified because this was pretty typical at the time. I had seen dozens of people I knew get arrested in some spectacular fashion. It was all a big show to keep the people in line. They would pick people up on the street, torture some of them, and return them after a few days or so. But I could see by his face things were different. He told me, "Don't let them know you speak some Arabic, keep your mouth shut and do what they say." He had been picked up a few times before, and to see the look on his face I was terrified. They took my friend and the rest of the people to the local jail, but they took me somewhere else. When I got there they put a wool blindfold on my eyes and threw me in a cell. I was there for a few days. I wasn't fed, wasn't told what was going on, just thrown in a room and left there for days wondering WTF was going on. After what seemed like a year, but was only a few days, some guys showed up and put the blindfold back on me and drove me to a place I later learned after the Arab Spring was called Behind the Sun in Arabic. A prison in Cairo. When I got there I was brought into a room filled with human-sized cages. I wasn't put in a cage, I was outside them. This is where I learned later that they kept all the foreigners. The Egyptians were packed in like sardines. I could only catch small glimpses of the place because I was being watched 24/7 and any attempt to catch a peek was met by a jab with a cattle prod. I was in this place for almost 3 weeks. This was a literal terror dungeon with professional torturers who worked in shifts. Imagine having this job. You wake up, have your coffee and a scone, and off you go to your 9 to 5 at your friendly local dungeon to torture for 8 hours a day. Every day was the same. Heat goes off, the room starts to freeze, and you start to shiver and then shake. It gets so cold, and just when you think you're gonna freeze to death they bump up the heat. Which is great at first, but they leave it on full blast all day. By the end of the day, you're drenched in sweat and dehydrated. Then they turn on the air conditioning again. During that time, first thing in the morning the torture would start, and all you could hear all day long was screaming and crying and begging. Occasionally the guards would walk by and kick you or scream at you, or just randomly while you were asleep someone would come over and use the cattle prod on your balls. Many people were tortured to death. I remember when the screaming would suddenly stop and you could hear the other prisoners saying, "From Allah we came and to Him we return," in Arabic, which is what we say when someone dies. Finally, my number was called and I was led into the interrogation room. I met the lead torturer, I'll call him Frank. Frank explained to me that he was going to ask me questions and I was going to answer, and if I didn't answer truthfully, I would be punished. He started interrogating me for almost 3 days. I had to give him my entire life story from my very first memory to the present day. I had nothing to hide, I had done nothing wrong, so I answered all his questions and did my best to be polite and not get my balls tazzed. I learned later that they used stretching, rape, and razor blades on some of the other people. I was never raped or severely hurt, but I was the anomaly. Being a white American and a Muslim, I was treated pretty well considering the situation. After my interrogation, I was taken back to the dungeon and I sat there for another month. I told the guy everything, and at the end he started to speak with me like a human being. I would even dare to say that I began to like the guy. When he wasn't torturing, he seemed like a decent dude. He brought me fresh oranges and other fruits and was very kind to me. He explained it that he was just doing his duty and trying to protect his country. He would stop by and speak to me about things a few times. He would even get a chair to sit and chat. One day he came and brought me to a room and he took the blindfold off me. This was the first time it had been off in almost 3 months. My eyes had swollen shut. I had an infection in my eyes, so the light was agonizing. I still have damage to my eyes all these years later. We had a nice conversation. He asked about my wife and said he had spoken to her and she would be there the next day to pick me up. Then he took me to a room with a bed and a shower. The water was cold, but it was the best shower I ever had in my life. I still couldn't see well, but I was so happy to finally feel free, even though I was still locked in a room. My wife was supposed to be there the next day at noontime, but noon came and went, another day, then another day. No food, no nothing. Then like 3 days later Frank showed up and said, "I'm sorry man, but you're not going home. I can't talk about any more than that. Just know I apologize, and this wasn't our call." I was then taken from the room I was in back into the dungeon. I spent another 3 days in the dungeon until I was finally led away again. I was brought to another room and they took off my blindfold. 5 men in suits were there. CIA, FBI, 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 who knows who else. I was told by the FBI that I was being sent back to America to be questioned. As you can imagine, I was at the end of my rope, all the stress, all the pain and everything over the past months, finally thinking I was getting out to be with my wife and have them come and tell me I was being extradited to the United States. I was 100% sure I was going to Guantanamo. I had a full-on meltdown and nearly threw myself out the window. It was the one and only time in my life I ever seriously considered suicide. They calmed me down, gave me a Xanax, and explained that I was not under arrest, that I was not charged or even accused of any crime and I would be a free man the second I stepped foot on American soil. He then informed me that my family in the States was involved. My uncle, aunts, of mother, father, my sister were questioned by the FBI and one of my uncles was even put on the no-fly list. It even made it on the local news. I learned that my wife had traveled back and forth over 100 miles a day to the American embassy to get me out. Going to the US embassy turned out to be the worst decision she could have made. My grandmother had even offered to mortgage her house if she needed to get me out. That my wife was pregnant with our first child. It was insane. I can't even explain in words how it felt to learn that people had not forgotten me. Turns out, torture dungeons are not good for one's mental health or self-esteem, and I often wondered if I had been forgotten or if anyone even cared. I think I spent another 3 days in the dungeon and Frank told me that the Egyptians had tried to free me but the State Department had told them they wanted me back. So, I was illegally extradited against my will. The US has no extradition treaty with the US. The State Department insisted that Egypt wanted me deported, but Frank told me there were absolutely no sanctions on me and I was welcome back any time, that he would even greet me at the airport. I did eventually meet him again, though not at the airport. I was put on a plane with 3 FBI agents and we landed in New York. The FBI joked that I hold the record for making it through JFK faster than any person post 9/11. We were landed and out the door in like 15 minutes. I was officially released under the condition that I would meet them to be debriefed. My mother was there to pick me up and she took me home to her house. I ended up meeting with the FBI every Saturday for 11 months. I was told that I was a free man, free to leave and go back to Egypt any time I wanted, but it would be in my best interest to sit through their debriefing, so I did. They went through my phone and made a list of every person in it and every single person I had ever met in my time overseas. And after 11 months I was told, "Thank you very much. take care of yourself, and I was basically told have a nice life. And just like that it was over. I was free. At the time I was here in the States, my wife had our son. The first of 6. I jumped on an plane like 2 weeks later and was finally home with my wife, and life was great. A few weeks after I returned, I got a phone call from a private number. It was Frank asking me to come see him at his office. I went, and he was very kind and polite to me. He apologized again for his government and said that no matter what I was told, the Egyptian government had nothing to do with my extradition. He said he just wanted to welcome me back and told me to have a great life. 20 years later, my wife and I are still married. We live in the USA now. My oldest 2 children are in Egypt, and we travel back as often as we can. Story: ready to move on from my mom. 19, ready to cut my mom out of my life. I know it sounds bad, but I'm done with my mom. She always plays the victim, and I feel like she really doesn't care about me. Let me start with the time we had a fight. My mom and I fought about her birthday. I couldn't attend because she wanted to have it in another city, and I was at home feeling sick and also on my period. I called my mom to wish her a happy birthday and told her I couldn't attend because I didn't feel good. She didn't say anything, just said okay and hung up on me, so I didn't think much about it. When my mom came back home, she didn't talk to me and ignored me. I left her alone and went to bed. She came into my room and started yelling about how I'm a bad daughter, that I'm never there for her, and never want to do anything for her. I ignored her because I was tired, and it was really late, so I didn't want to argue. The next day, she gave me the silent treatment, so I left her alone and went to school. When I came back, she started to argue with me about her birthday, saying I was the only one who didn't come. Also, my mom has a girlfriend, and she was saying stuff about how weird it was for me not to come to my mom's birthday. I ignored all of it because I wasn't in the mood to argue. Later that day, my mom called my uncle and talked about how ungrateful and bad I was. She put her phone on speaker so my uncle could talk to me. My uncle started screaming at me, saying I should have gone to her birthday. Keep in mind that I was sick and had cramps, and the party was in another city, about 1 hour and 50 minutes away by train, sometimes even 2 hours. My uncle didn't let me talk and kept cutting me off, so I ignored them and did my own thing. She kept going about how bad I was, so I called my boyfriend because I didn't want to stay home anymore and just wanted to go out for a couple of hours to have some peace. My mother came into my room and said if I left, I wouldn't be welcome anymore and that she would throw me out. I was talking with my boyfriend on the phone and just went to bed with him on the phone. There's so much I can tell you. For example, my mom's girlfriend has 2 children, 17 and 12 years old. There was a time I needed a new laptop for school because mine was broken, so I asked my mom if I could have one. She told me she didn't have any money, so she couldn't get me one. I let it go and called my boyfriend to talk about my laptop and how my mom couldn't afford it. I asked my boyfriend if he could lend me some money so I could get one, and he did. I bought my laptop. A while later, one of my mom's girlfriend's children had a birthday, and he wanted an expensive present, a steering wheel for a game that cost $450. She bought it for him. Mind you, she said she didn't have any money when I asked her. I know y'all could say maybe she didn't have it at that time, but I asked her so many times, and she bought it the same day and came home laughing about it. That happened a few months ago. Recently, I cooked some rice because I was hungry, and I just made it for one person because my mom always yells at me if I make too much rice, saying it's a waste. That day, my boyfriend came to visit, and we were on the couch watching movies. My mom came downstairs and started screaming about why I didn't make enough rice. I ignored her because my boyfriend was there, and I was a little embarrassed. She kept talking about how bad I was and saying I was selfish. She also talked about my boyfriend in front of him, saying he wasn't welcome anymore. My boyfriend is the sweetest person and always kind to my mom, helping her a lot. I felt bad for him when she said all that. My mom also wished I was dead or that she had aborted me. I started crying, and my boyfriend hugged me, making me feel safe for a moment. When he left, I went to my room as fast as I could and went to bed. I'm always outside at my boyfriend's house or my best friend's house because there's always a problem when I'm home with my mom, and I don't feel like staying home. I don't feel safe at my own house. I'm writing this because an hour ago, my mom came into my room and told me she was leaving for a couple of days because I'm a bad daughter and she doesn't understand why I'm like this. I was just in my room watching some TikToks, so I looked at her confused and asked what I did. She raised her voice, saying I'm bad, ungrateful, and treat her like sh*t, asking what she did to deserve this. I was so confused because I didn't do anything, didn't even raise my voice. I hate it here and hate that she always says those things. I'm not even bothering her and never asked to be born. She also wishes that if I have kids, they treat me wrong and that karma gets me because I treat her wrong. I don't get what I'm doing. My mom is a hypocrite, narcissist, and manipulator. Story: abusive parent, toxic family, and high expectations, which makes me suffer endless even after being miles away. Currently, I am a 21-year-old student. I had to think of a way to escape my father because the abuse had been going on for a long time and no one in my family knew about it. I decided to study abroad because I thought it was the only way to escape, even if only for a short time. This was a decision I regretted because I was struggling in the classes of a course I didn't like at all, archaeology, which is not popular in my country, and I had to convince my family to take it. Study abroad. My parents also expected me to be the best and smartest student in the class. Since I was little, they always wanted me to study well and be smart. If my scores were bad, they would repeat that over and over again, and even if I got good scores, they still saw that they weren't perfect. They compare me with my smart friends and say I'm lazy and useless. They also forced me to study what they wanted after class 10. When I finished my studies, they put me in an engineering field that I begged them not to choose. I failed my classes and kept it a secret until a professor told my dad everything. Things got worse and I had to beg them to let me study another major, and finally they agreed to let me study history. After a year, I endured in engineering. My grades dropped dramatically in 10th grade, which is when I realized I was being abused by my father. I hate it, I feel disgusting. I had to pretend everything was fine at school and at home. No one knew. I didn't dare tell my friends because I was afraid they would consider me dirty. I couldn't sleep without locking the door because I was afraid he would do something. I always have to keep an eye on where he is, or I will lose control for fear of what he will do when no one is there. I try to stay near or around other family members. I'm very afraid of him. Even now, I still feel like he is watching me and sometimes touching me even though I am thousands of miles away from him, which makes me always in a state of tension and unable to concentrate, happy or even relaxing. All my favorite things like books, reading time, and car rides were ruined because he did something there, and I felt like all the things I loved were tainted. Plus, my father has an influential job, so I couldn't seek help legally or from any organization back home. My family also moved many times, so I always had difficulty making friends. I rarely talk to others. To add salt to the wound, they let my younger brother do whatever he wanted. He played cricket and was very serious about it. They let him choose easy subjects for higher classes and the course he wanted for college, while I had to give up badminton, which I had played for 7 years in 10th standard. Because I'm not good at studying. I don't hate my younger brother because that's when family feels like real family, when I can play with him, talk about things we like, and simply be brothers with fun games and competitions. Argued, while my dad was terrible and my mom criticized my grades and weight, calling me lazy all the time. In February 2023, Near the end of the final semester of my undergraduate history major, there was talk about studying abroad, and I jumped at the opportunity because I felt it was the only way I could escape from my father. They paid for my tuition and accommodation in the new country. But I feel useless here because I don't know what to study. I felt useless and stupid among other students, and I felt very bad. I sought out a mental health counselor in college because psychotherapy became accessible for the first time. I still endure it because I have to call my parents every day. They make me feel guilty every time, saying they paid a lot of money, should study hard, get a job, and my mother talked about marrying someone and I should finish my master's program and PhD before age 25. I just want to drop out of college and run away sometimes. All I want is a simple job, not a high-end job like my parents want. All my life I wanted a small job, small things, and a simple life. I feel like I made the stupidest decision to come here because I didn't know how to study or even get a job. I only had 1 year in this country, and I was always afraid that I would be sent home. I was tired and afraid that my father would find out I was failing my classes again. I can't go to class and face students and professors. Even though I've been here for 4 months, I still haven't made any friends. I do not know what to do. I can't live alone, have no job, no money, and no visa to do it. I want to stay in this country and try to get by, but I have no way to do that. How can I get away from my parents and only keep in touch with my younger brother? I'm afraid that if they find out, they'll do something to me, or they'll kick me out on the street and talk bad about me with my younger brother and other family members and friends. I can't tell anyone, that's why I'm venting here. Story: Growing up in an abusive home. I, 21-year-old, was in and out of the foster system. My 20-year-old brother was adopted the first time we entered the system. I wasn't allowed to be because my mother decided that she wanted me. 6 years after she got me back from the system, my mom had another child with a different guy. At this point, I was 6, turning 7 a month before my youngest brother was born. My mom sent me to stay with my brother's grandparents every weekend and any time I didn't have school. My brother's grandfather started to molest me at the age of 7. After each time he did it, he would give me money or take me to the mall and let me get whatever I wanted. He would show me porn movies and tell me that's what he was going to do with me. Once I told him to stop and he pulled out a shotgun from under his bed and told me, "If you tell anyone, I will kill your brother and mom in front of you." The day I turned 9 was the first time he raped me. After, he took me to the mall. I tried to tell my mom about it, but she ignored me and hit me for making up stories. When I was 11, a family friend, police officer, asked me if I was okay and if there anything happening with my brother's grandfather, and I said no. Around this time, my mom started using meth again and she basically disappeared. My brother and I saw her 2 times a week on her down days. When I did see her, she would scream at me and beat me. During this time, we started going over to my brother's grandparents' house more due to my mom wanting to throw parties at the house. 5 months after my 13th birthday, I tried to kill myself. I was getting bullied and tormented at school. Outside of school, I was getting screamed at, beat, and raped. I couldn't handle it anymore. My mom's boyfriend at the time found me on the bathroom floor oating and called 911. When I was 14, I decided I didn't want to go over there anymore. I was just starting high school, making new friends and starting paying a lot of sports. At this point, I saw my mom 1 time a week, and the rest of the time I was taking care of my little brother. Took him to school, fed him, bathed him, helped him with homework, and put him to bed. I started to miss a lot of school due to him getting out early than I did, starting later or just having days off that I didn't have. Teachers started to get worried and CPS talked to me. I lied and said nothing was happening. School year was over and summer break started. We started to see my mom more now and the abuse got worse every day. A week after school was let out for summer break, my mom found out I had a boyfriend. She started to punch me in the head and stomach, calling me a whore and slut. She kept telling me to admit that I was a slut. My little brother watched it happen and was screaming and crying. I wouldn't stop crying due to my head hurt so much. She told me to get into the car and drove to the ER. We parked, and as we were walking in, she changed her mind and said that she didn't want people to stare at her. When we got into the car, she accused me of being pregnant and forced me to go to the store and buy a pregnancy test. When we got to the store, she refused to go in and told me to stop crying when I'm in there. When I returned, she told me to just admit that I was a slut or to get out of her house. I packed a bag and went to my best friend's house. I was there for a week before my mom came to look for me. She apologized and said that she wouldn't ever hit me again and that she was so sorry and she loved me. I believed her and went home. Mid-July comes around and my mom woke me up screaming that her boyfriend at the time touched my brother and I. She called the police and they questioned us. They came to the conclusion that she was on drugs and detained her. Police waited with my brother and I until CPS came. My mom was put on a 5150 hold and both my brother and I were placed grandparents' house. That night I remember waking up to his grandpa on top of me covering my mouth. I felt like I couldn't move and started to cry. When he was done, he wiped my stomach off and went back to his room. After the 72-hour hold my mom was on, CPS told me I could go back home, so I did. For the first 3 days everything was fine due to my mom sleeping the entire time from being medicated. When she finally woke up, my mom's boyfriend was with her and she started to scream at me to get her belt. I did and she started to hit me with it, told me that she didn't love me, that I was the reason why my brother got adopted all those years ago, and that she wished she never kept me. I went up getting away and I grabbed my already packed bags and I ran until I couldn't anymore. I didn't have anyone to call me besides my brother's grandpa. He came and picked me up from a park 2 miles from my mom's house. I was with him for 2 weeks until CPS showed up and took me to a permanent foster home. When I was visiting my brother, his grandpa would assault me and then give me $50. I was extremely happy in my new home. I finally felt like I had people that loved me and wanted me. After being in the foster home for 10 months, the family wanted to adopt me. My mom told my social worker that she thought me and the father had an inappropriate relationship and that they weren't pushing reunification. I was then taken from that placement and put into another one with a foster mom and biological son. It was hell there. She screamed at me, didn't take me to doctor's appointments, didn't feed me, take me to school or pick me up at 10 p.m. from work. I ended up in the ER for 7 days because I had an infection. She refused to take me to see a doctor when I asked her to. She allowed her son to hit me. I kept telling my social worker, therapist and CASA what was going on, and they told me I was being dramatic and that none of that was happening. Foster mom would tell everyone that I was a horrible foster kid and all I did was get into trouble. I started to heavily smoke weed and tried to stay at friends' houses as much as possible. My mom got into contact with me after 4 years of us having zero contact. She apologized to me and told me she was clean and asked if we could have a relationship. I was hesitant, but I didn't have any family, so I agreed. I went back to my home state and visited her and my brother for a week. Everything was fine. I'd never experienced this version of my mom before and I really enjoyed it. After 5 to 6 months of her talking to me all the time and being very nice to me, a flip switched and she started to ignore me for days at a time. Then it moved to weeks and months. I expressed multiple times that I really wanted a relationship with her and that I don't understand why she doesn't want one with me. Anytime she would talk to me, it would be about her, and then she would hang up and I wouldn't hear from her for weeks again. All I wanted was for her to be my mom, and she can't be that for some reason. The last time we talked, she told me Andrew passed away, and I said, "Who was that?" "I'm sorry for your loss," and then she would NVM and I haven't heard back from her for the last 4 months. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.